There's going to be a live zombie demo shooting exhibition during this talk.
Don't open that door.
Paul, did anybody tell you you're playing the zombie?
Yeah. Nice. Welcome. Did everyone have a good lunch?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's worth every penny I paid for it.
All that was left me was hummus, so I walked around a little bit. So this is Larry Pesce and Darren Wigley. They've given this talk a little bit in the past. They've given you a lot of insight into it. I'm glad they're able to give the talk today. Because I tell you what, when the end of the world comes or the zombie apocalypse is upon us, which I truly believe can happen, I'm coming to either Larry or Darren's house where they're stockpiling guns, ammunition, food, water, gasoline, and things of that nature.
You think so?
Yeah. If I can make it past their defenses. But it really begs the question, how do you rebuild the internet after, well, I like to use the zombie apocalypse, but they can talk about it way better than I can. So everyone please put your hands together for Larry and Darren.
Thank you. So we don't have the nice little microphone that Paul does because we can actually project. And that's like trying to share one between the two of us is going to get really awkward. I mean, I like Darren and all, but. All right, so we're going to talk about rebuilding the internet at the end of the world, or at least our thoughts for rebuilding the internet at the end of the world. So a little bit about us. We're both penetration testers by trade, as of late. I work with a company called Internet out of Knoxville, Tennessee, and I'm a penetration tester now for the energy industry, so complete change to anything that I've ever done before. Lots of hardware hacking, lots of application of traditional pen test type of techniques to a completely different industry, which is a bit of a change for me. And Darren, are you still fun employed?
As of Wednesday, no, I will no longer be fun employed. I signed with the company yesterday, so.
Woo! So Darren, up until Wednesday, was fun employed. We both used to work for a company together, and they decided they were going to shutter their security practice. Fools. Well, we were off for new adventures. We both did networking together. We've both Paul.com crew in some way, shape, or form, and both ham radio operators. I'm KB1 TNF, Kevin Bacon 1, that's not funny. And Darren is KB1 Wool, no means no, and so does Bob. Right? And Darren and I have been hanging around and worked on all sorts of crazy projects together. Since college, Darren was best man at our wedding. We've done all sorts of...
Him and his wife, not our wedding.
Right. Yeah, or something. Shown here a picture of one of our projects was the Barbie Jeep that was remote controlled that shot those stress balls from Shmoo balls. And it was semi-automatic with the tube out of the top would hold like 10 balls, and it had a bolt that would move back, drop the ball in, load it, fire it, move the bolt back. Completely remote controlled, remote drivable. It was on a turret. We could move the turret around, and we could engage fire mechanism remotely as well. So just some of the things that we've worked on, and we've been doing this stuff together for quite some time. All right, so what makes us experts in this stuff? Well, nothing really. But we like to do lots of stuff. Darren, we're what now? We're pros at internet uptime testing.
Yeah, we are. It's up.
Yeah, we work from home. So what's a lot of our day comprised of? Google, Slashdot. We make sure the internet's up a lot by web browsing. So we're pros at internet uptime testing. We love all sorts of gadgets. Phones, electronic gadgets that have radios that do all sorts of neat stuff. And we consider ourselves, quote, amateur preppers. We make sure we've got some things so we don't necessarily have to rely on emergency services or all those various scenarios that happen. But we're not whole hog. We don't have the whole underground bunker and any of those types of things. And we don't have unlimited funds. So there's definitely some temperament with some reality for some of this type of stuff for us. The security community has made us paranoid, and even more so now going into my new job with Internex looking at the power systems. This makes me even more paranoid about how potentially vulnerable some of our infrastructure is, and where we can be in a position that, well, there will be no infrastructure. Okay. Darren and I together run a website called survivalnerds.com. It's really low traffic because, well, we're busy, we have family, we're too busy stockpiling gasoline. But we talk about how we can use technology once the world comes to an end, so to speak, to potentially make our lives better. So it's the techie hacker approach to survival post-apocalypse. All right, so the end of the world as we know it. Okay, let's talk about a couple of the scenarios. We'll just take sort of a brief intro as to why this might happen. It really doesn't matter which one of these scenarios you folks believe in. Let's assume that one of them is going to happen, but we're going to sort of focus on one in general so that we can sort of cover all of the bases. Okay. So let's discuss some of our favorites.
Active flying spaghetti monsters, so you got active gods. How many people here have seen like the show Preppers or one of those? Those guys are out to lunch. A lot of them are. I mean, it's just crazy what they do and what they believe in. But we're more focused on the acts of God. You see what happened in Moore, Oklahoma, with tornadoes, and local area. What's going on right now in Colorado with the fires, and so you have these acts of nature. Whether the fire was set by somebody, I don't know, but you have these acts of nature, and when you're in that type of a scenario, when your world has just ended, your world has just come to has changed completely. So. We're looking at more scenarios in those types of things. So,
and not to offend any one particular god, we'll go for the South Park approach and offend all of them.
Yep.
Okay. Some of my personal favorite, zombies. And, whether or not zombies are really going to occur or not. The 5-year-old, my 5-year-old daughter is really into the zombie things too. But she keeps asking, "Dad, your zombie's real?" And well, she's 5, so I tell her no. So she sleeps at night, okay?
See, I would tell her yes. Somebody voted for Obama, right?
Oh, wow. Wow. In any case, when we start really looking at the whole zombie thing, zombie is a great metaphor for some other things as well. Is that it's someone that has you have something that they want. In the case of a quote zombie, you have a brain, they want it. In the case of sort of a doomsday scenario, the zombies are the folks that don't have guns and food, and you have it and they don't. And even some correlation to computer security type of stuff that, zombies are all those attackers out on the internet because you have something they want, whether it be internet bandwidth, data, or some sort of secret sauce. So the zombies are folks that want what you have.
So, potential financial collapse. You hear a lot of talk. We're just pumping money into the system, and it's all going to come crashing down. But if something should happen, and dollar can't be propped up anymore, then it'd be pretty much mayhem overnight from
mass inflation.
Mass inflation, and a loaf of bread costing $25 for a loaf of bread, and $30 for a gallon of milk. You're gonna have some serious problems, some looting, because people aren't going to be able to pay that, so they're going to have to go out and take it.
Yeah. And hopefully you already have some.
And the protection around it. But
government failure there?
Yeah, government failure, coup attempt or something like that creates a lot of instability. You look at what's going on in Syria, in other parts of the world, and you think, well, that could never happen here. Don't be too sure, because I'm sure at one time Syria thought that could never happen there either, and it has. So, being prepared for that type of a scenario. So we're trying to look at some more realistic scenarios, even though people say, "Oh, that could never happen here."
Yeah. And speaking of the one that people will say, "Oh, that will never happen here," is some sort of EMP type of attack. And this is sort of this last one that we're focusing on, because this whole EMP type of attack really takes into account of all those sort of scenarios. With an EMP type of attack, we're potentially going to have some financial collapse. We're going to have some government failure potentially. We're going to have zombies. Those folks that want something that you have. We're going to have acts of God because of all of these other underlying problems, whether they be fires or we now can't get rescue gear to put out fires, and tornadoes, and not being able to respond to them appropriately because our stuff doesn't work. The other additional challenge that we've got with the EMP is likely the complete lack of anything electronic working. So that techie's approach to post-apocalypse, well, now all that stuff goes away, or doesn't. So this is the scenario that we really want to take into account to be able to protect our gear, to have it survive EMP in some way, shape, or form. Sort of the, I know Adrian at HackerCon Doomsday Eve this past year spoke quite extensively about some of the EMP stuff. I highly suggest you go check out his talk. We're not going to get into all the semantics about EMP and whether or not how testable it is. And I remember seeing on the show, it was a Doomsday Preppers on National Geographic, where they do the quote EMP test, where they take the metal trash can and they put their radios in the metal trash can, put the lid on it, and then they take a car battery, put the negative on the lid of the trash can, and they take the positive and it sparks around the trash can. That's not an EMP test. That's energizing and making sparks with the car battery. Yeah. Looked great on TV though, right? So we'll be talking about some of this stuff. This is the scenario that we're really sort of trying to approach here, because this is sort of the massive, this is the one that's going to cause the most problems potentially for rebuilding the internet.
So again, the end goal here is what you can do yourself to remove your address from needing help from the government, from emergency responders and things of that nature. So you can say, I'm good, thank you, why don't you go help my neighbor who didn't prepare? And I can take care of myself. So this is just making yourself reliant, because you look at a scenario like Katrina, how many people were stranded and no one helped them. So you may not even have emergency services showing up at your door to even try to help you. You're going to be on your own. So this is just what you can do to make sure you're self-reliant, so you're not reliant on the government for things, because they may not even show up. Or if they do show up, then you can send them off to go help your neighbor, because you're all set. So again, just making your own self secure. So.
Yep, and sort of the whole sign on the property during Katrina, looters will be shot on premises type of thing. Finding ways that we can leverage some technology to potentially survive an EMP to help protect your friends and family and those types of things. Because this may go on longer than just a couple of weeks in something like a Katrina type of disaster. This could be permanent or semi-permanent. Okay, so we're going to take sort of the hacker's perspective, look at all this, their survival nerds, a techie's approach to survival post-apocalypse. And we want to make sure we understand a couple of the tenets of, quote, being prepared, and those couple, 2 is 1 and 1 is none. So if you have a radio and it's outside of your EMP cabinet and the EMP goes off, well, now you've got how many radios? None, right? So 1 is none. And if you have 1 radio outside your EMP cabinet and 1 inside your EMP cabinet, when the EMP goes off, how many do you have? 2. Now 2 is 1 and, well, 2 is 1, right? So now you've got 1. Now after all of this has happened, and well, now you need a radio, and you have 2 of them, and 1 of them breaks. Where are you going to get parts? Nowhere. You're going to find another radio, right? Well, no, I already have a spare. So having spares is definitely crucial. Some of the other tenants, do more with less. Okay, so great, we've come to used to having these really powerful computers. I mean, I've got a Core i7 desktop, laptop sitting on my desk that I use all the time. It's power hungry and may not necessarily afford me a lot of capabilities, when we don't have power. It's a monster now, it works great. Try to power that for 9 hours off of solar, not so much. If we can minimize our impact and do more things to help protect us and do more things to communicate with less power, the better. And then the haves versus the have-nots. So we're going to have a lot of stuff, and we want to be able to communicate with other folks in our area to know when the, quote, have-nots are looking to take our stuff. Now, how can technology help with us for some of this preparedness? All right, so 2 is 1, 1 is none. Have more than 1 of each of our stuff. Start doing some of this acquisition of devices now, because if we think about this, with some of the technology that we're going to be talking about that we like for this, trying to find this after the fact is going to be nigh impossible. So where are you guys going to find replacement ham radios identical to the ones that you guys have already got? You get my house? Yeah. Or the neighbor's house? And well, where are those neighbors that have ham radios? Well, we'll go look at that up in the FCC. Oh, wait a minute, the internet's down. Yeah, we're not going to know that. We're going to start having to do door-to-door knocking. And what happens when one of those doors we show up has someone still living inside that's shotgun? It's going to be a really bad day, right? So we wanted to start looking for some of this stuff in advance. Some of the other things that we thought about was keep in mind some of the spares in the community and community consensus. So I was looking to buy another vehicle that my daughter and I affectionately call the zombie defense vehicle. So a four-wheel drive vehicle that we can use to go bounce around the woods. And I bought a GMC Yukon, and there's lots of GMCs of very similar variety that are all road rolling stock. Well, the Yukon died, and so I bought a Jeep Grand Cherokee. Why? Because they're everywhere in New England. You want to do batteries for some solar power stuff? Great, deep cycle marine batteries are really awesome. Try finding those in Colorado. Okay, not so much. Lots of volume of deep cycle marine batteries here. So making some of those choices based on your geographic area are really good. And this stuff doesn't always need to be expensive. And we need to store them appropriately. We'll talk about some EMP. And the big thing is that test both your primary and your spare. So 2 is 1 is none, test them both. And do some rotation. Some technology saving lives. Okay, so there's going to be some obvious technology that we're going to want. We're going to need beans, bullets, and band-aids. We're going to need some technology around some making sure that we're healthy post-apocalypse. We're going to need some technology around doing some growing of our own food, acquisition of food, and well, some technology around protecting ourselves, bullets. But some other stuff is, well, how is this all going to potentially relate to saving lives? Well, maybe we need to now be able to have some communication with the neighbors, so when we know that rolling group of bandits are coming through, or that there's some refugees coming through that are just wreaking havoc, those types of things. We want to do some communications with our neighbors, maybe even at the end of the block, so we get some advanced notification. So for some short distance communications, now maybe we turn that into some long distance communication, town, county, state, region, you name it, depending on sort of where things stand post-apocalypse. Okay? I also think about some, quote, disruptive technology. From reading a lot of those, quote, survivalist novels and all that type of stuff, if we're in our, quote, bunker, and now the government wants to come and take all my stuff because we're now in a society where we have to share all of our bullets and all of our food, and I may not like that, what happens to those government agencies? Well, they're probably using a lot of the same stuff that they were before. Well, they happen to have a bunch of P25 radios locked up in a cabinet somewhere, and now they're going to use P25 radios with all of their attack teams to come take my stuff. Well, let's use some of this really simple, small technology like the IME ping pagers to create a P25 jammer. There was some papers released and a talk 2 years ago of DEF CON about some researchers that actually turned one of these IME ping pagers into a P25 jammer. So it did denial of service attacks against the Project 25 radios and rendered them useless. So now the folks, the government agencies or the folks that have acquired P25 radios that are looking to come take my stuff can't communicate with each other. But I know they're coming because the folks down the block told me so. So using some of that type of stuff as well. And then potentially doing some data exchange for ebooks, movies, we've got to have folks be entertained, medical type of training, survival education after the fact, and there's a good reason to have all these electronic resources.
So
You're up.
protecting some of your electronics. So to protect some of your electronics, we really recommend that you get some sort of an EMP cabinet. It doesn't need to be anything too complex. This is a picture of Larry's our EMP cabinet, and it's just that. It's just a metal locker that we put some what was it, the Rhino? It's not the actual Rhino spray bed stuff. It's the cheap stuff that you can buy in a can and do it yourself. Sprayed that down so nothing had a physical contact with metal, and and that's all it is. And then beyond that, you also got to take a look at, well, what are some of the other probable things that happen? So if you look at like a flood coming through. We've had a lot of rain here in Rhode Island, so I live right next to a river and it's pretty swollen. And think about, well, if that comes in, well, great, you had this EMP cabinet, but now it's filled with water because it wasn't waterproof. So looking at some things like that. Silicone, fix insulation, and make sure that you're not just protecting against one thing, but you got to look at some of the other things that are probable to happen.
Yeah, and some of these will come into play when we start talking about some of the other technology stuff as well. To briefly gloss over some of the EMP stuff, the research that we read about EMP stuff is that if it's a device, an electronic device connected to more than 18 inches of wire, it acts as an antenna to take that the electromagnetic pulse energy right into the device. So having stuff connected to 18 inches of wire and not sealed in a metal enclosure or something of the like is pretty much doomed. So yeah, great. Take your radios that are connected to those nice antennas out in the backyard that you're using for your ham radio stuff, and disconnect them and put them in your EMP cabinet when you're not using them, or have a bunch of spares and do some rotation so you're testing them. The sealed metal enclosure, and by sealed is a manner of speaking. There can certainly be some gaps because the alleged energy is not going to be able to pass through a couple of gaps. Like the doors on that big black cabinet aren't perfectly sealed. There's probably an 1/8-inch gap. A couple of metal filing cabinets, same thing. You have to be able to open the drawers and some of those types of things. Okay, so great. Electronics, Larry, Darren, how the heck are you going to power all this stuff?
So you have a lot of different options. You've got to obviously first off you have a generator. That's the most common one. But when we had the what was it, Irene or Sandy or something?
Yep.
Well, we didn't lose power for Sandy. You lost it for Irene, though, didn't you?
We lost power for Sandy for a little bit,
But anyway, we had a long power outage. I was thinking of the one that came through. You had lost power for a while, and at night you can hear the generators. So guess who has power? Follow the noise. And you can be quite some distance away and follow the noise and find who has stuff, which we want to avoid.
And then what happens when you run out of gas?
Yep. Then you got to go find it, and that involves traveling, which you may not want to do. Next up, wind. You've got plenty of options there. The stand-up vertical kind that just rotate around, or the windmill kind. But again, there's moving parts. Parts break, parts wear out after a while. What are you going to do to replace them? How are you going to find parts to replace them? Last up, solar energy. Not a lot of moving parts. Pretty easy to set up, and a lot of places have them now. The Chinese are nice enough to flood us with cheap solar panels and put all of our solar panel companies out of business. But you can acquire these at, where did you get yours?
Harbor Freight Tools.
Harbor Freight Tools for what, $150 for
$140 with a coupon.
Yeah. With so it was one of those sets or both sets?
One
set,
right?
Set.
And
there's
a total of 3 there. One up on the deck and 2 down low.
So one set of 3 panels and ties them all back to a charge controller, which we have back to a battery, which you have a picture of. But this is, it's redundant. It's something you can use. You got to have sun, which would be helpful, but it's quiet and it's renewable and works great for, how long did you power your ham radio stuff?
We used it the entire week of Irene, and actually all the ham radio stuff and the 2 computers and monitors are all powered off of solar completely. So
and that's the footprint it requires right there, the 3. So you the one up top and the 2 down bottom.
They disassemble, they move. So a couple of years ago, Ben, we did a field day, and one of these panels and 2 batteries powered the entire setup for the entire day.
So dedicated solar one because the charge went up after we were done.
Right, yeah, which was awesome. Yeah. So the other one too is, make sure you buy a second charge controller, because if you're using these right now, the charge controller is hanging out somewhere, mine's in the stairwell, and it's not an EMP cabinet. EMP comes through, it's going to wipe out the charge controller. Guess what? I got 3 more sitting in the EMP cabinet. So when that one gets wiped out, I can put another one in, and when I'll be another EMP attack, I still got 2 more. And or when one breaks. On batteries. So find a flexible charge controller. Again, I have the one currently from Harbor Freight Tools. It's worth the money I paid for it, but I want to be able to do some remote monitoring. It's cheap. I can find replacements easily. I have a bunch of replacements, so that works. Find one that's going to address all the potential battery types you're going to encounter. Again, keep in mind that whole community consensus of what you're going to find for batteries. So here I've got 2 brand new deep cycle marine batteries. Yay, Walmart. Sitting on a shelf with a charge controller. There's a bunch of plans online for being able to brew your own with something like a 5x5 timer and some fairly simple electronics to deal with. Use this stuff for bartering with others post-apocalypse, for charging other folks' batteries. You've got plenty of stored energy. Now maybe they will bring you bullets, beans, and Band-Aids to charge their stuff. Great options there. We've got a bunch of battery types. Pick the one that's going to work best for you, and potentially they're going to need some various charging methods. For example, lithium-ion is going to have some different requirements as opposed to the seal lead acids. Think multi-purpose and portability. When stuff goes to heck in a handbasket, every car out there is going to have some sort of sealed lead acid battery in it, and well, they can be moved. They might be heavy, but they can. So we have some ideas why we may want to rebuild the internet. We've got some understanding about some of the technology we can use to help support it. We know how to power it. We're going to leave the whole operational security, the whole OPSEC stuff up to you guys because it will vary based on location. Again, why wind might not necessarily be a great idea because now people are going to look around and say, hey, look, that thing's spinning. That was smart. And or, hey, I can hear that generator running. Guess who has power? Okay. So we're going to take this sort of as a staged approach about how we can start rebuilding the internet when there are no other services available. We're going to start small. We're going to start at the neighborhood level. Because quite honestly, after that, where does your world really end? As far pretty much as you can travel on foot, which is like within a reasonable time frame, back to the end of the block and back.
So my world is from the couch to the TV and back again.
Yeah, well, see, you're not going to have a TV, so your world might actually expand a little bit. Yeah, you might actually have to get up. So your world is going to be small at the end of the block. You're going to be dealing with neighbors. So let's enable that communication first. Once we've got that down, let's see about adding a couple more neighborhoods or maybe the town and dealing with some of that. And we're talking, weeks to months to potentially years for some of this stuff. So, Darren?
So, acquiring some wires after this all happens, you look at something like this, and that's going to be useless after, things go bad. So you've got some wire options. Most likely a lot of the wiring that you're going to find out there now is fiber, which doesn't transmit electricity very well. But in some of the older stuff is not very well maintained. And the systems might be unreliable, old. You've got to find somebody who knows something about them to make them useful. So climbing up on a tower like this to pull down some wires is also very dangerous. And if there's not, you think a twisted ankle isn't so bad now, but a broken ankle when there's no medical help is pretty life-threatening. So
and so the two that knows those that know the cables. Darren and I went to college at Roger Williams, and we got the opportunity to talk to a bunch of the old-time telephone engineers that were supporting the college and stuff, and they were literally the guys that put all of the copper through the town of Bristol. And these guys were in their 80s when we were talking to them 20 years ago. And they could tell you where every piece of copper was in that town because they put it there. Well, they're not terribly useful to me now because they're mostly all dead. And those that are still, that are 90 potentially years old, they're probably not going to be scaling ladders too quick to be able to now enable some of that communication between neighbors and repurpose some of this. And on the fiber stuff, yeah, great, let's use the fiber. Well, now we've got to have specialized gear that can transmit optical stuff that's going to have significantly higher power requirements, which we're powering stuff off of solar generator or wind at this point. Well, what about some phone patch? Yeah, no CB operator ever looked like this. Okay, regardless of which end of the phone. Okay, so this is potentially good when times start to get tough. So a phone patch, we're going to have our radio connected to a phone somewhere in a fixed location that we can use our radio to start dialing various lines. Call home when my cell phone is, the cell network is oversubscribed and not usable. I can use a radio to get the phone patch to dial a landline at the house to tell my wife to you know, pull curtains and make sure all the doors are locked and that type of stuff. Great. Short distance. Potentially we're going to run into a situation where those wired phone lines aren't going to be working too much longer either. And for an expense perspective, for us to set one of these up and keep it maintained just for emergency purposes is going to be relatively expensive, dedicated gear that could probably be better served elsewhere. Maybe we could find a public one, but then again we run into the whole problem of, great, well, what's going to happen when there's no power for a couple of days? It might not work very much longer. So who needs wires anyways? I am like Paul. I go and pick all the pictures for these presentations by doing Google image search for the title of my slide. And this was the first interesting images that came back. I don't know, he's got a problem. Pika, maybe? I don't know. So let's not rely on this whole wired technology and move to something wireless. Yes, we're talking ham radio as well as commodity Wi-Fi gear. And they sort of tie together a little bit. Okay. Yes. No, I don't. So yeah, let's talk about ham radio a little bit. Yeah, it does require a license to transmit. We're not going to be here to extol the virtues of getting your ham radio license. How many of you guys have ham radio licenses now? Okay, I'm disappointed. I am disappointed. Go get one. And that's about all we'll say on it. It's really easy to do, and you'll have lots of fun doing it. Okay?
It's a standard test that the question pool is known. Gordon West makes a series of books that you memorize the questions in, and you go take the test. What is it, $20? $15. Take the test and you're done. It's very easy to do. I even did it. So if I can do it, you can do it.
Yeah, and Ben's going to kill me here. You can learn more of your stuff doing the ham radio stuff by actually doing and participating than the exam. I found when you start getting into some of these more advanced license classes, there's all sorts of RF theory, and I can't do math to save my life. If I'm in a prison camp somewhere and they start asking me to do like calculus, do calculus or we're going to kill you. Just kill me now because I'm not going to get it. When you start getting into the advanced RF theory, which you don't necessarily have to do, you take the test, you memorize the answers, and you get a lot of the experience by actually doing and reading and taking time to digest after the fact. So yeah, get your tech license. Gives you the door to having availability to all sorts of spectrum. Getting your general allows you additional spectrum that will give you the ability to do longer range communication in different bands. Okay. The tests are pretty easy. The big thing about this is, hey, maybe you don't want to blow your OPSEC. The FCC requires a valid mailing address for your license. So if you don't want the government to know where you are, well, this might not be your method, but this is what we have to deal with now. And we have to follow their rules and regulations.
You put your mom's address.
Yep, valid address, mailing address where you can get mail.
Unless you live.
Unless you live with your mom, like
Unless you
this
live
guy,
with your mom, yeah.
then you're good to go. So that may be a detractor to some folks. I've talked to some folks and said, yeah, no, we don't want to have to do this because we don't want the government to know where you are. Well, guess what? Post-apocalypse, where's your government? Yeah, who knows? Where are they going to be to enforce it? But now, right now, you have to live within certain rules to be able to practice what you want to do. So that you can do this now, and when stuff goes to heck in a handbasket, you guys already know how to do this, and you practice, and you don't have to try to figure it out when you can't get access to electronic resources on the internet. Okay? And get it done now. Practice. And live within their rules. Okay? The other thing, too, is that ham radio is incredibly powerful. You can do all sorts of crazy stuff with it, which you guys will see a little bit of it. And they're very much entrenched in the emergency communications community. Aries, races, Skywarn, you name it. They often do volunteer stuff for all of the major events with road races, and ham radio community was involved with the bombings in Boston just because they were there to support the event. From a communications perspective. So very much so into the emergency communications community. And you take all of those things that you learn there and it's directly applicable here. Okay. And we can make this stuff as easy or as complicated as we want. Okay. And do more with less. And we can do actually quite a bit with very little with some of the ham radios. However, with great power comes great responsibility. There's lots of regulations that we need to deal with, but on the converse, with great responsibility comes great power. So practice makes perfect, right? So if we want to practice doing some of this ham radio stuff, we have to be licensed. The fines are pretty substantial if you transmit without a license, so go get one. It's cheap, it's easy, we talked about that, but we've got to deal with their rules. But these rules are setting the stages for us to understand the technology, how to use it. We start using it and we start learning more. And now we can start getting some practice. However, post-apocalypse, we may want to do some things a little different. Right now, we can't do encrypted communications in some of the ham radio bands. Oh, because the FCC says no. Well, what happens when there's no FCC? Maybe we should start practicing some of this stuff in areas in which we are allowed to do that and apply those to those places where we might want to be able to do them later. Okay, so getting practice now. So think about the applications, think about how we can do this now so that we can apply that when the FCC doesn't count anymore. Hey, this is where stuff can get expensive for ham radio stuff. Okay, this is a really impressive setup, lots of boat anchors. So really large radios that require tubes, but maybe some of them are expensive, maybe not. Okay, you can find lots of great deals on eBay, Craigslist, the ham radio flea markets, swap meets. My understanding is the MIT flea market does a lot of ham radio stuff. I haven't been, I need to go this year. Yeah, good luck with that. I'm not a huge fan of some of the absolute brand new radios. Why? The buttons are really tiny and there are more features to try to figure out and more stuff to break. I have a Yaesu FT840, actually I have a pair of them. They're simple radios, there aren't a lot of features, and they work great. Okay? And I can figure out how to use these things fairly quickly, and not a lot of buttons to break. What?
I've got a Whoops on, I don't know, UV something or other, but it's literally a $100 radio that works great.
Yep. And
It's
some of them are
$100.
cheap, $40. Don't forget, 2 is 1, 1 is none. Okay, so the cheaper these things are and reliable, you can now afford potentially more of them. Keep some of them in your EMP cabinet. Okay. Don't discount some of these boat anchor radios that are some of the older technology and are using tubes for reception, transmission, and power amplification. They're not going to be very portable, and it's going to suck to move them in and out of your EMP cabinet. You're potentially affordable, you get some great understanding about the electronics because you're going to have to repair them yourself most likely. But allegedly, vacuum tubes are EMP proof. I haven't seen the testing, I don't have any way to test them myself, so I'm going by what
Put
I'm
them in
reading
the
on the
trash.
internet.
Put them in the trash can.
Oh, right,
Car
trash
battery.
can, car battery, right? Right. So we're going to have to go with what we read on the internet and some of the government studies that have been done that are available. Okay. Great, so some gear. Okay. We could do like this guy and took a $500 automobile and equipped it with $50,000 worth of radio stuff. So it can be as expensive or inexpensive as we want it to be. Okay. More radios equals more toys. Great. And I've got a couple of radios stuffed in my EMP cabinet. Great. Who am I going to talk to? Oh, well, maybe you should encourage some other folks in your local community to start thinking about maybe group buys and or standardizing on some equipment and or just making sure they have equipment to begin with. Okay? Trying to find some of the stuff after the fact, great, no problem. You're going to be going door to door. You'll find some stuff that wasn't EMP protected. It might not work. Don't forget some of the extra parts. You know, have spares, extra antennas. And don't forget some of this commodity gear too. We start talking about using some of this commodity gear. Great, I've got a bunch of them stacked up in the basement. Well, what happens when I only have one of them and I need another one? I'm going to knock on doors, and what I need to do with it is using some customized firmware on something like a Linksys WRT54GL. How many of my neighbors have one of those? Probably not many. I mean, maybe you guys.
All the ones with their SSID Linksys.
Yes.
But those are probably not GLs. Those are probably Gs, the version 6, 7, 8 that I can't do squat with, aside from use them as a doorstop at that point. So, you know, having the stuff that you need prior to the disaster is helpful. Okay.
So again, more practice. Hey, look, I think Ben's in that picture.
Yep. Right in the middle, in the white shirt.
So again, having here is great, but you know, participating in some field days like what Larry and Ben are doing here. There's the solar panels again that power their stuff all day, and again, you know, participating in some field days to get to practice with the radios, making contacts, so that way you know how to use this stuff once things go up and what to look for. Know the national calling frequency for 2 meters, and
Which I
things
always
of
have
that
to ask
nature.
Darren what it is.
146.5, right?
I don't know, I have to ask you.
I have to look it up on the internet and then tell
Ben,
you.
5.2. You're close.
146.52.
So yeah, make sure you know how to use it at a moment's notice. All right, great. We talked about ham radio. We talked about power. Larry, where's the freaking internet? Okay. We just talked about voice communications. Okay, so we talked about radio technology. We talked about some gear. We talked about survival goodies. But how does this help me rebuild the internet? Okay.
It's a series of radios go 101001, right?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
All right, let's start figuring out how we can use this stuff to transmit data. The computer. Wow, dude, this is like the Chai, like 1977.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm more of a future little back problems guy. What do you use?
Mind the gap.
Is that what Paul's there right now? Is he on the chive?
No. Take that.
In any case, so great. Let's use a computer, right? We're going to use this to surf the tubes. Well, there are no tubes, so we've got to build them. Why don't we use that same computer that we're going to use to surf the tubes to help rebuild it? Okay? So how about using it to get a bunch of stuff, using it to control some of our ham radio gear so we can enable it for data, use it as a server to connect to other various technologies for doing distribution. We'll be talking about some of that as well. Okay? So how about some rig control software so we can control our radios with the computer. We can get it to do automatic encoding and decoding of digital modes so that we can potentially transfer some data over these as well over long distances. Okay. We're going to be starting taking this back of the days of, well, the modem. Okay? Because it's essentially what our computer is actually going to be doing for us. It's going to be converting digital data, you know, binary ones and zeros into audio tones, and transmitting them over radio interfaces instead of a telephone line. And we're going to talk a little bit about some of that stuff. So the computer is the modem at this point as opposed to a secondary device. So how are we going to do that? We're going to take those ones and zeros and convert them to some sort of audio tones for some transmission. Okay, same with the modem technology. Some of the same issues apply. Okay? Telephone lines only had the ability to do certain fidelity for audio tones, so they had to be within certain ranges. Same thing with some of the RF, and depending on distance, we're going to run into fidelity issues and only being able to use certain tones. Okay? So let's talk about some of these potential applications. Okay. First one.
Good old Morse code.
Which you don't need to know anymore to get your ham radio license.
Yeah, that's key. You don't need to know. The computer can do it
I see
for
what
you.
you did there.
Yes. But it is very slow. So using Morse code, even with the fastest computer, you're looking about a 300? Yeah, about 300 baud rate. Or
16.5 baud.
16.5 baud with a 20 words per minute, and that's with somebody typing Morse code, right?
Yeah, and 20 words per minute is pretty typical for a decent Morse code operator, CW operator, and that's freaking slow.
So you don't want to be transmitting a document on how to do remove an appendix via that, because that's way too slow. Your patient will be dead before you get the data out. So now we need to look at something like, well, now I'm sending this over the air, but I want to put something, some encryption around it. So you think about like something like base64 or UU encoding, help either do some compression or hide what you're sending. But there's some issues there that you're out of the Morse code set. You're missing some crucial characters there that are needed to complete the transmission, and those are just missing. So this may not be your best option because it's slow, missing stuff, and there's better options.
Ultimately, taking UU encode or something of the like to take a binary type transmission and send it over a text-based medium. That would be great. And CW is essentially ones and zeros. So a DIT and a DAS could be converted to a 1 and a 0. We could do that. But that becomes time consuming, and there's not a lot of precedence for that now. So we have to use text with something like UU encode. But UU encode requires a bunch of characters that don't exist in the Morse code set. However, it's really good for simple text transfers.
So, this one, yeah.
Yeah, think telegraph, email, right? It's fairly easy to implement. We can use our computers to do that. We can do it manually with a key. We can do, with a computer, we can schedule broadcasts. We can make them cyclic, so the same message is going over and over and over and over again. And we can do really long distances with low power. For example, this radio here is a CW transmitter built inside of a tuna fish can. Whoa, 5 minutes already? Damn, we gotta move. All right, so yeah, next one up, PSK31. Let's do another digital mode. It's been around a little bit less time than Morse code. Again, here, using the computer, all we're doing is reading and typing, and it's going to take care of everything for us. Again, slow, 31 baud. That's double Morse code. There's no error control correction. It's not stuff that we're used to. It's like E71, you name it. Great, we can do 128 character ASCII set. We can do base 64. We can do UU encoding. The problem is it's not really good for large blocks of data. We can still do long distances with minimal power, up to around a 5 watt. We'll deal with some pretty good poor conditions. And if you guys are doing stuff well, this might be enough barrier to entry for folks not to be able to decode some of your small transmissions. Do more with less. Well, maybe we should start considering doing rig control and PSK31 encoding with something like a Raspberry Pi. Low power consumption. Okay. We can also do something like WinLink 2000, which is full-featured email transfer. So the image here is mobile HF rig and the antenna, $1,200. Hector 3 modem, $1,000. The ability to send email when commercial communication systems fail, priceless. Okay. Great. $2,200 to be able to send email when there's no power. That's expensive, okay?
That's why you get one of those square things and start charging your neighbors.
Nice. Wait, square?
The little,
right,
little handheld.
No power.
Well,
Right. In any case, it's really expensive to set up a dedicated WinLink station, okay? Which many of the WinLink, the WinLink network requires you to set up a dedicated station. However, it will work in peer-to-peer mode. Which is what Mars uses for a bunch of their communications as well. Again, ham radio being entrenched in the emergency communication stuff. Again, now with the Navy and Marine Corps. Okay. We can do this in peer-to-peer mode. We've come up with a schedule to be able to do some data transfers, and it's open source with WinLink 2000. Okay. We're moving fast. Okay. We only got a few minutes left, and we got a couple more slides to go. We've got a bunch of other stuff with packet radio that we can do. The problem is you've got to have dedicated hardware on both ends, and it's expensive. Yeah, I went and searched for packet radio, and I got this guy. What is it with the mouth? I don't know. All right, how about commodity gear? Okay, we're thinking Wi-Fi, right? Technology that lots of us in this room understand. It's all will be based on IP. Specifically the Linksys WRT54GL varieties, and Darren and I fairly recently had some successes with OSLR on the TP-Link small routers that they use for mini pwners and that type of stuff. And well, Paul and I wrote this book, so this is relevant to our interests, repurposing some commodity hardware for this type of stuff. Okay, you know, Ben, you working on setting up this node, or is it up still? Working on it.
It broke.
It broke. Okay, so working on it again.
Yes.
Okay.
Working on a new one whenever it comes up.
Excellent. So HSM mesh, so high-speed multimedia mesh network. They've actually just changed the name of this project, didn't they? Anyway, cover of QST magazine this month is a big implementation supporting a big race in Colorado using HSM mesh. So it's a self-healing routing mesh network. With low-power devices, the Linksys WRT54GL, and we can do fully fault-tolerant mesh networking over long distances. Okay? And carries native IP traffic. We know how to do that. Okay, so let's just use a little bit of Wi-Fi, right? Great, it shows up with an ad hoc SSID, all the same mesh nodes with the same SSID for HSM mesh auto join. The problem is limited power, 1 watt out indoors, 4 watts outdoors. Let's do some weatherproofing and put them outside and do 4 watts. But go get your ham radio license. Because with your ham radio license, you're granted to be able to use channels 1 through 6. They fall in the amateur radio band plan so that you can do more power. With your technician license, $15 and some studying, gives you the right with your ham radio license to do up to 10 watts with 802.11b for a direct sequence spread spectrum. Okay? Once you do orthogonal frequency division multiplexing on either G or A, you can do up to 1500 watts. Ouch, that's a little bit better than 1 watt. Okay? Implemented stuff has been done quite a bit by the HSN mesh folks. Go get your antennas now, get your amplifiers now, because trying to find those after the fact is going to be a problem. Okay? Use some small and expensive laptops. I like netbooks. Get your software now and store them in your EMP cabinet, because when the tubes are down, great, good luck installing .NET 2.0 on a machine you have to rebuild. Hey, where are you going to get that? Well, you better have it in your EMP cabinet to install. Okay, so we've got some stuff that we want to do. We've got a lot of work now to make this happen. So let's start enabling some of this communication between us. And so we've got to go to get our next fabulous speaker up, and Paul's giving me the stink eye and shining lasers on me.
I was not shining lasers on you.
Yeah, no, not yet, not yet. So hit us at survivalnerds.com. There's some contact information there. Paul.com as well, and you'll be able to find us. And we're looking to start enabling some of this community so we can potentially start doing some tests either locally or regionally for practicing ham radio stuff, building HSM mesh networks with some of the local ham radio clubs and some of that type of stuff. So, thanks.
Thanks, Larry and Darren. So next up is Roy. Will be in this room.